great to see such an attentive audience on a nice spring day. So you could also spend your day outside and do some other stuff, but actually you decided to spend your day here to work together and to listen and have discussion and conversations about what I think is a very interesting topic, and I hope you as well, about taxation and student taxation, as far as I'm concerned, in an international context. I think we have 1.5 hours, that's a good amount of time to address a wide variety of aspects that keeps me busy, keeps us busy in many aspects. My name is Ruiter. I'm representing PwC, and as you see from the flyers here and the banners, we are a very modest firm. we only have 3 letters to present ourselves. We don't need too many words. I come back to that, by the way, because that maybe has something to do with the topic I'm talking about, also about national tax planning. So you may all know PwC as one of the big 4. Originally, let's say an important part of our business is audit work, controlling and giving public opinions about financial statements of companies, international companies, Romanian companies. But connected to that, we also have a very large group of consultants in our organizations in Romania and all over the world, specialized in tax matters, management consultants matters, and what we call advisory. So a whole broad spectrum of anything that could be relevant and important for business people to become successful. Whereas the auditors typically have, I would say, a more public function, because they are there to present a certain validity of financial reports and give an opinion that these reports issued by management are correct. We as consultants are more, let's say, business advisors, working hand in hand with the business people to solve business issues, to help them to avoid problems. PwC in Romania is the largest consultancy firm. In that respect, I'm responsible in PwC Romania for the tax and legal services department, which is a total group of around 200 professionals. I'm also responsible for PwC in Southeast Europe, so I'm also supervising our offices in Southeast Europe, in Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Moldova, Kosovo, Albania, interesting countries. As was also announced, I'm also the chairman of the Dutch-Romanian Chamber of Commerce. As you may have noticed, I'm not Romanian, but I feel half Romanian because I'm already here for 9 years. So in that sense, I have grown to like the country and sometimes even love the country. Sometimes hate the country, but it depends on which moment of the day or which moment of the week you speak with me. Actually, at this moment of time I feel very fine. I mean, I love this country, it's going in the right direction. I have really truly enjoyed my past 9 years and look forward to continue my work here. I come from the Netherlands, that's my background. I studied law, and I graduated in 1984 in tax law. So I have a master's degree in tax law. From the university in Leiden, which is to some of you maybe renowned for, at that time I believe also still now, for having a fiscal legal department focusing on international tax matters. So actually as a result of that you see quite a lot of Dutch people in international fiscal roles because of that background. I then worked for 12 years in the Netherlands as a tax advisor, as one of the Big 4. And the Netherlands tax advisory practice is very dominated by international business. Dutch companies, Dutch clients are very active in their own country, but also outside. So there's a lot of international dimension in our business, but also foreign companies coming to the Netherlands who are using our services. Then after 12 years in the Netherlands, I moved for a short secondment, which somebody said, why don't you just go there for a year to Poland? That was in 1994, 1995. because we have a new office there, we want to set it up, we want to build it up, and you have experience. Could you go there and help them? My first year was then prolonged for another year, and then another year, and then after that I stayed for 8 years in Poland. And then actually it's a bit difficult to get back, so for me it was almost that much time very difficult to move back to the Netherlands, because I got a little bit distracted from the legal system there. And I moved on in 2004 to Romania, where I'm now doing what I'm doing. So without pressure. My topic for today's session, I'd like to check with you that if it's okay with you, is very much focused on what we call international tax structures and global business. Is that okay with you? Is that well, you say no, then I'll still do it because we have anything else. But then again, let's say, what is the point here? We are living more and more into the next slide. Maybe one further. This one, yes. We are living in a global world. Now, you may not completely appreciate it, but I come from a different generation, and in the past 10-15 years we see the globalization of the business models only developing and becoming more and more important. And Romania plays an important part in that whole process. I'm making a reference now to a specific case that you may or may have not picked up from the press, international press, but I think also to some extent in Romania it was covered. Last year, October, November, Financial Times, almost every day, wrote about it. Big issue in the UK, England, about a company called Starbucks. And we know Starbucks. Starbucks, fantastic company. I love Starbucks. If you ever go to, we have not enough Starbucks in Romania. That's really fun. We want more Starbucks in Romania. Starbucks is an American company. Fantastic brand. Have you ever been in New York or in the United States? There's a Starbucks in every corner. So if you have a block of streets, and a block has 4 corners, there are 4 Starbucks. And they're all busy, they're all full. People like you, but also young professionals, old people. You just go there, read your newspaper, meet people. They know what kind of coffee you like to have. It's all organized. It's sort of like you feel like you're coming home. But it's a fantastic brand. It's a global brand. Starbucks has big operations in the UK as well, in England. They have around, and I'm not disclosing any information which is not public, so don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about a client. I'm talking about press coverage. So this is information I'm sharing with you which is publicly known. Starbucks has around 4,000 coffee shops in the UK. They employ 40,000 people. It's a big company. They sell swimming pools of coffee by the minute. Massive business, also in the UK. It's bigger in the US, but it's in the UK also a big business. Have been active in investing in the UK for the past 15, 16, 17 years. Very successful. With all that operation that they have, and they have real estate, and they have factories, they have distribution lines, they have whatever they have to run a company of 3,000 outlets. With all that operation that they have active there, in the United Kingdom, over the past 16 years, it has been found out by the press, picked up by NGOs and by the press, that the effective tax, corporate tax, profit tax, that Starbucks paid in the UK over 15 years, such a big company, was, how much do you think? Any ideas? 15 years Starbucks activities in the UK, how much profit tax? Well, guess, doesn't matter. Let's say something.
Billions.
A billion?
More billions.
Billion pounds.
Yes.
£1.5 million only. And most of the years they operated in the UK were loss-making. So you think, what is happening here? So it's absolutely not what you think. Everybody says, oh, it's a big successful operation, they must pay billions of tax on profit. But essentially what happened and how Starbucks has set up their business is completely different. They actually are set up a business model and I come to this a bit later also in this context, in such a way that most of their profit is shifted out of the UK by royalty schemes to companies outside of the United Kingdom. So big operations, they pay their salaries, they pay their rent, they pay their coffee, they pay whatever they pay to the external providers, but also within their own group, they pay royalties to a Starbucks company outside of the UK. And those payments are deducted for profit tax computation. So the profit tax is reduced. We call it that the tax base is eroded, is reduced to the basic minimum amount. Most of the year Starbucks is active in the UK, they were making losses. Their costs were higher than their revenue. And still it's a very successful company. So this is all driven by tax schemes. This is all driven by tax planning. This is all driven by international structures and global business considerations. Somebody in Starbucks, United States says, we're going to run our business in the UK in such a way. Now, just to go a bit further, the company which has received all those royalty payments from the UK Starbucks, I don't know if some of you have read the stories, but any idea where this company was a resident, where this company was based? No? It was in the Netherlands. And then he said, well, wait a minute, the Netherlands is not a tax haven, it's not Cyprus, it's not Cayman Islands, it's not BVI, it's not the Netherlands is a decent, normal country where you pay a lot of taxes. Yes, that's true. But the Netherlands government has put a specific scheme in place to have a very restrictive taxation regime applicable for royalties received from foreign companies. That's allowed. That's fine. That's all perfect. That's agreed upon within the European Union, and everything is approved and agreed upon. So that is completely legitimate. Now, there's a lot of things to be said about what happened with Starbucks, and I know if you have opportunity, you may want to look at YouTube or Google. The British Parliament has devoted a hearing session specifically to the Starbucks case. Very interesting. You see the big CEO guy of Starbucks in front of a hearing committee of the British Parliament, and he becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. They really scrutinize him to the bone, because it's a public issue. It has developed into a public scandal. Now, coming back to this scheme, I don't know if you can see it, but this is actually a kind of scheme that we use in many cases, and but also for many of our clients. The multinationals of the world are operating under a scheme like this. Also Romanian companies. Romanian companies are there somewhere on the lower end of the food chain, but still, Romania plays an important role in those kind of schemes. Typically what we see the whole business model of a Starbucks, but also of a Google or a Unilever or a Procter & Gamble, be cut in pieces. And why do we do that? Why does the tax director or the CFO of Google or Starbucks or Unilever, why they look at it this way in the world? Because the key focus is, of course, to allocate the profits, the revenues, and the cost to the countries where the tax regime is the most appropriate for their purpose. Now, of course, the ultimate overriding purpose of those kind of tax planning schemes is ultimately, of course, to reduce the tax as much as possible, because we don't want to pay taxes. That's what CFOs are paid for. CFOs and CEOs, for as far as they're working for international companies, and specifically if they're working for US companies, part of their salary, part of their remuneration package, part of their bonus scheme is connected to what we call the effective tax rate of the group. The effective tax rate is not the tax rate of 60% or 20% or whatever the tax rate is in Norway, but what the effective tax rate of the whole group, all the activities. So you're always looking for opportunity, because tax is a cost. It's just simply cost of doing business. And then, let's say Romania, we have a modest rate of 16%, but in many countries in Europe, the tax rate on the profit part goes up much higher. In the United Kingdom, United States, the tax rate goes into 30+%. So there's a lot of incentive there. If you're able to reduce your cost overall in a group with 1% in Starbucks, you make an awful lot of money for the shareholders. If you reduce it with 5%, 6%, 7%, 10% or even more, then of course your value added to the shareholders is substantially increased and the value of the company goes up. So there's a direct relationship between tax planning and the share price, and the income of the CFO, and the income of the CEO. Now what happened with Starbucks, the other, what I just described, and also with Google and also with some of the other companies that we may talk about, is actually that this was not something which was picked up by the press because they did something wrong. There was not a scandal. Starbucks scheme that I've just described, and these kind of schemes are designed and are implemented in most cases fully in transparency, in openness, in direct communication with the tax authorities. We go to the tax authority and we say, this is what we're going to do. Our clients want to do this. Do you agree? And then there's a negotiation. And the tax authorities will say, well, yeah, but a little bit more this, a little bit more that, and then we agree. Okay, we agree. We sign off. We have an agreement. United Kingdom, Her Majesty's Revenue, has agreed on the structure of Starbucks that I just described. There's in the same scheme a confirmation, a ruling, as we call it, with the Dutch tax authorities around the same scheme. So all is approved, all is legal. Nevertheless, in the current days, NGOs and the public part, some of the political parties who are not necessarily that knowledgeable about taxation, come to the conclusion, are of the opinion, and make populistic statements. If you look at this public hearing in the British Parliament, you will find out more about it, that these kind of schemes are not correct, that they should be challenged, that they are not they're not in line with what the taxpayers should be paying. That we should change the schemes, that we should change the world and make it a different place for as far as taxation is concerned. And I want to talk about that specifically. So that's the overriding, let's say, example. And that's an important challenge. As much as the CFO, the CEO of Starbucks is happy with the fact that the shareholders' value is increased because of his fantastic tax planning, he's probably more concerned and has even more sleepless nights if his name is on the front page of Financial Times. Because that has an immediate impact on the share price as well. And even more important, some of the clients, people who buy coffee, may want to walk away and go somewhere else. Because if you have the public against you, your brand will suffer heavily. And if it is connected with some aggressive and smart tax planning, which is perceived as being against the intention of the rules, then you have a problem. Now, as legal people who study law, you then come to the interesting component of substance of the law or the rules themselves. It's absolutely legal what Starbucks does. It's absolutely confirmed. There were the best tax consultants involved, and all the authorities have agreed and approved on the schemes. Nevertheless, you get into an area where perhaps the perception of the scheme itself is not completely in line with what the legislators intended to put in place when they drafted and designed the tax rules. And the outcome is certainly in today's world, where all the governments in Europe and the Western world, actually all over the world, are suffering and are confronted with austerity packages and have to save money and cut costs and trying to increase their revenue from taxes and make sure their budget is met. When they then compare that with a scheme that the big multinationals are doing everything they can to erase the base of taxation and to shift profit to other countries with a lower tax regime, is of course something which we have to address. And our profession as lawyers, as tax lawyers, international tax lawyers, becomes extremely exciting and very interesting. At least I think it's extremely exciting. How to understand that there is a difference between the intention of the law and the actual meaning of the law and applying the rules in the correct way, but still the public says it's wrong, or the politicians say it's wrong. I will come back to that later, because that's exactly that's actually the sort of scheme that we are or the time that we are facing now when we look at international business models. It's not only about production, it's not only about distribution change, it's also about those kind of things, tax planning and public image that you have. And tax is an important part of it. So, multinational companies, in the national environment, they are facing internal changes, external changes, tax changes, political changes, administrative changes. Now, when we talk about effective tax planning, why it is important is that I talked about the earnings per share, and the effective tax rate is an important element of the earnings per share. Any increase in earnings resulting from organic growth, acquisition, or other corporate initiatives is diluted by a company's effective tax rate if that is not the right rate. So the effective tax rate significantly impacts the earnings per share as I want to describe, and therefore it's a direct impact on shareholder value and the bonus of the CEO. And all these things are important, and they have an impact on the brand. If you don't have a good CEO in Starbucks, the Starbucks company will be going down. And those things. So let me ask you a question. Having said all this and given you this sort of dramatic story about Starbucks, do you think that what kind of changes do you think you may expect as a result of this? This is a relatively fresh discussion. This is all relatively recent and actual in the public debate, in the press, but also among the politicians. The G20, so Obama, Putin, all those big guys have talked about this. Angela Merkel, this is an issue on their agenda. The G20 talks about this kind of stuff, allocating profits. Do you think that we will see dramatic changes? Do you think that these kind of schemes are going to be changed? This is a rhetorical question. I'd like you to reflect on this. Do we expect change?
I think that however the authorities will try to change the legal tax system, the tax planning will adapt to the legal system.
Yeah. So yeah. We will not lose our jobs. No, absolutely true. What kind of change can you envision? What kind of expectations do you have? What kind of what kind of change could you see?
To be honest, I can see a change, but in the legislation of the G20, which are now depending, and lots of their incomes, the state's incomes, are depending on the big corporates. I don't see any significant change. Yes, they will change something. They change, okay, you cannot do that. But also, I think the corporates, the international corporates, will agree, because the changes that the states will make will be not to affect, but to give some moral face of the planning scheme. Because, as you stated, the media, the population, the politicians, they don't say, or if they say they are wrong, these aren't illegal schemes. However, they are a little bit less moral. And I think the changes from the state is to put the moral aspect in a little bit in the legal state, in the legal framework, and the changes, thus the changes will be, from my opinion, little, but in a aspect that the public wants it. So they will focus on what the public wants it, but as a substance, the change will be little, from my opinion.
I think as well. If there is any change, because of course Obama and Putin and Angela Merkel and the Japanese, what's his name, Mr. Abe, the new guy there, and also the new Prime Minister of China, they all have this macho stock. We're going to address this. We're going to make this. We're going to make a change. This is not acceptable. We have these kind of large schemes in place. We have to do something. How can you implement such a change? I think that is also your question, of your point. There will be some change, and they are advocating this, and we'll talk about it in Moscow during our next G20 conference. We'll talk about it, and we'll come up with some suggestions. How can you implement such a change? Because we talk about, can you do again in this scheme? This is the big one, not the other one. This one. These are at least 20 countries in easily 3 or 4 continents. We have the procurement company in Switzerland, typically. We have the IP owners, the intellectual property owners, typically in the BVI, in the Caribbean, typically. We have the risk distributors, the full risk distributors, typically in Romania, in the countries where the operations are taking place, or in UK, or let's say where high risk service support procurement companies, typically also in a high tax country, a high cost country. Brand company is typically also in a country like the Netherlands, where there's a specific regime in place. So we talk already about 3-4 continents, 20 countries, easily.
I think if we speak about G20, they can easily make a fiscal and financial treaty where they say, okay, we will lay this scheme in place. However, we will impose all the countries that are part of this financial treaty will have to impose a little bit, just a little bit of restrictive measures on how to let the profit go to the countries and not to the fiscal paradise of the whole Union.
That's it. So you use the right, I think you use the correct a treaty. A treaty implies that there's something like a model which is multilateral, an agreement between the big players in the world, so the powers of the world sit together and they drink a cup of tea, maybe they drink a glass of wine. Let's do it like this.
I'm thinking like on OECD conventions, like
OECD, even better. Yeah.
OECD conventions, on the model of the OECD, they may put in place a sort of convention, like OECD conventions, where they say, okay, you are allowed to make any schemes, however, a percentage of all your earnings in the countries should remain in that country. I don't know the percentage.
Yeah.
5, 15, 20.
Okay, I got you. What do you think about his idea?
I don't think it's possible.
A multilateral treaty agreed upon by the big powers in the world, which more or less says allocation of profit. So if you have a brand in the Cayman Islands, 2%. If you have a server company in Switzerland, 3%. If you have your risk activities in Romania, 20%. That's your idea?
Yes.
Not going to work.
I don't think it's possible.
Not going to work?
For example, if you said that Starbucks has 40,000 employers in UK,
Yeah.
they'll say, okay, we can't do business in UK anymore, you have 40,000 people to want to feed. In that's in UK. Add Germany, Holland, and all the rest of the countries in Europe and the world, you obtain easily a big number, maybe 1 million employees. And that's only Starbucks. If you add all the international companies to have the same interest, it's easy to see what's the result.
I think the problem is there's no real enforcement. OECD is a typical example about it. OECD is, and it's important also for you guys with a legal background, but also for people with an economic background. The OECD is a very important, let's say, platform for study all the important economic development and related legal aspects to that as well. But the OECD does not have the power to enforce. It's all based on a voluntarily confirmation that you will act in accordance with the OECD. It's all based on rational, but what you see also happen on the other side is that tax planning, and I gave you an example of the Netherlands, this royalty company that receives the royalties from Starbucks is specifically designed based on Dutch rules to attract those kind of things. Because the Dutch government says, I want that money, and I only tax you for 1.5%, or even lower, depends on how you set it up. But the taxation base is very small. You ever been in Amsterdam? That part around the airport, with the big offices and the banks, is for 50% driven and based by those kind of businesses. That's what they do. Trust companies, lawyers, tax people, accountants, bankers. That's where they make the money. Every government, also the participants in this G20, have their own territorial interest to actually have a tax scheme in place which is able to compete with other tax schemes, because you want to attract more investors. The Star is not a good example, but Google is a company who's able to say, I don't care where my tax base is. I can have my company resident anywhere in the world. Okay, I have something in the UK and in the US, that's where I come from. There's an important activity there. But my IP rights of Google, my servers, my real value of my brand is not in the US. I can put it anywhere I want. So if you're going to tax me in the UK, in the US, or whatever you want to say, I just put my Google activities in Switzerland, and Switzerland says, why don't you come in, Mr. Google? So there is this problem. There is this problem. And Google is a good example. Google is a fantastic company, fantastic brand, fantastic products, but has clearly also set up an international tax scheme which is in line with those kind of things, and it's very volatile. There were initially in the past, we talk about, let's say, 5 to 10 years ago, similar discussions around how to tax e-commerce. Similar problem. How if you have online sales or web shops or those kind of things, but also how to allocate the cost of developing software to a specific country. Issue in Romania, big issue, because you love software development here. Big issue here. I'll come back to that. Then it's very easy and so there's a lot of incentives for the tax planners, the tax advisor and the CFO in those kind of companies to allocate it to a country where there is the lowest cost and the lowest tax. And you can do that pretty easily. Initially the thought was, when we were still sort of at the beginning of the internet era, and probably before your time, but let's say when I sort of first started looking at the internet, let's allocate the profit, something like you were also referring to, let's allocate the profit and the right to tax to the country where the server is located, or to the country where the research is done, or any kind of other key which sort of helps us to determine that there is a right to tax in a country where something is happening.
Because the server are in the, like the UCD condition, the server's location is the base location.
Well, that was a thought process. But we are walking away from that. It doesn't work, because Google, for for instance, has been working on, and seriously working on the concept of putting the servers on a boat. Seriously, why don't you? You have a big ship, and you put your servers on a boat, you have all these antennas, I don't know how it works, but it works apparently. And you just do your stuff so you don't have any taxes. So you want it? We'll do it. That's tax planning.
Also, there is not for classification reasons, but there's a company that has its servers or wants to have the servers, keep the servers in space.
Yeah, for instance,
any IP infringements problems.
I got a magazine, this Eveniment, I don't know if you see it. He was my professor when I studied fiscal law in the Netherlands. He was my professor. And smart guy, very critical, learned a lot from him. He then was Minister of Finance and in charge of taxes. He did a lot of tax reforms in the Netherlands. So he's a real, true tax expert. Then he moved into writing and he became a professor again. And now he actually is in this sort of final phase of his, let's say, the new phase of his professional life. He's an entrepreneur. He has an internet company. And his statement, sorry for the Dutch that is here, but his statement here says, tax laws, as they are applicable internationally and in the countries, are not internet resistant. The tax rules that we have in place, internationally, OECD, whatever we have in place, are not able to capture all the income and the commercial and the financial aspects of the internet economy. E-commerce cannot be captured fully in the way we have set up traditionally our tax legislation. Interesting. Something has to change in order to capture all those kind of things. And I agree, something has to change in the direction of a treaty. But the big issue for the G20 and the G8 and for the OECD is to really understand how to allocate the right to tax and how to enforce it. Now you would, for instance, expect, let's say, something like the European Union is the platform to enforce that, because we have an economic treaty in place, we have we build up some expertise, there is something like Brussels, we have a parliament, we have a commission, we have a common understanding. The European Union has been discussing over the past 15 years, maybe have you ever heard about the Common Consolidated Corporate Tax Base, CCCTB, Common Consolidated Corporate Tax Base, which is meant to unify the tax computation of companies active in more than one member state. So if I make a profit in Germany and I have a subsidiary in Poland or in Romania, the tax should be computed based on a consolidation of those three companies, and the allocation of the right of tax should be based on an agreed upon principle. The discussion about the CCCTB has been taking place for the past 15 years. This moment of time, it's nowhere. We don't believe it's going to happen. It will change the world dramatically, but it's not going to happen. It's too complicated. It's complicated to enforce it. It's also very complicated because we have to deal with so many political interests of so many players that are going to decide upon this. Because ultimately, Mr. Basescu, Mr. Ponta, they want to attract foreign investors. How can you attract foreign investors? By tax rules. It's a very common way to do it. Let's talk about that topic maybe for a short period of time. Do you, and this is also around this topic, but just to share with you and also see how you have some knowledge around this topic. We talked a little bit about tax schemes, and I gave you some examples about Starbucks. But can you bring up some other examples of EU members, EU countries in the European Union have specific tax schemes that are important in those kind of planning schemes. Can you bring up an example? Or maybe differently, can you give an example of a country which has used their tax rules to attract foreign investors?
Cyprus.
Cyprus, yeah.
Switzerland.
Sorry?
Switzerland.
Switzerland is not the European Union.
No,
No.
I think of Europe.
Yeah. So within the European Union. But also important, Cyprus is, I'll come back to that, Cyprus is a bit specific. But Ireland is in my view a very important country. Ireland was a country which was the poorest member state, well, had a lower GDP per capita than Romania when it joined the European Union. It was a very poor country. And when they joined the European Union, I don't know, it was 25 years ago, they were really, because they were so small we didn't care, but actually it was why do we have this poor country joining the European Union? And they, this immediately after, and in the context of joining, they put a set of schemes, tax rules in place to attract foreign investors, made it very attractive for the Microsofts, the IBMs, and also for banks to have their head office in Dublin. Today's world, probably 50% of all airplanes are owned by Irish companies. Ireland is the country to use for financing and leasing airplanes. So it has a massive value of assets, massive financial industry, but also production. As a result of these smart tax rules, Ireland has made a fantastic growth spurt in economic development. And on the back burner of that, there was a real estate bubble, which actually was the biggest problem when they collapsed again, when the crisis came. But the real economy in Ireland is pretty robust. And is robust, has grown based on very smart and good tax rules that attracted foreign investors in the European Union. So there's this ongoing competition internally that will be always there to satisfy the interest of the governments. And we still live in a world where the governments are chosen by the citizens of the country. We don't have European elections that choose for a European Commission government structure. You vote for the Romanian government. The Cypriots vote for their Cypriot government. The Irish people vote for their Irish government. So for the political powers to stay in force, they have to make sure that their people are employed, that there is business, there is growth, there is economic prosperity. That is always connected with those kind of tax schemes in my view as well. Coming back to Cyprus. Cyprus is slightly different. Cyprus already had a scheme in place before joining the European accession to be a very preferential country for holding companies. And holding companies specifically to hold shares in companies outside of Cyprus, and also for financing. But more specifically, Cyprus did not extend that to the extent that they also, let's say, developed their rules in such a way that there would be more production as well. It's actually only a financial industry that has developed, but not a real economy where people are inventing things or who are making things. So in that sense, the overriding economy of Cyprus is predominantly driven by financial instruments and by the banking sector. Just to give you an idea, Cyprus is a country of 800,000 inhabitants, something like that, not even a million, small country. In PwC Cyprus, we employ 1,200 people. Just to cover that massive industry. Probably we'll lose some people because things are not going correct there. But there's a big difference within the European Union between Cyprus as a pure holding company and financing company, and for instance Ireland, which has done it much smarter to really develop also the local economy. So all those kind of things are a bit different. Okay, this is the general context. Any comments, any questions, any observations from your side? Do you have any view on this? How do you see Romania in this spectrum? What do you have in idea of this? Is Romania playing any role in this? It does. Let me give you the answer to my question. Romania is actually, certainly when it's about those kind of international schemes, and for as far as international companies operating here, a very interesting place to do those kind of, to use that kind of schemes, and are typically used for specific schemes to use good labor force for relatively cheap cost. Mainly in IT. IT is a very well-developed industry in this country, and actually also plays an important role in the European Union. And I think that's only going to increase. Let's go one step back. You were talking about allocation, and let's say the idea, the concept of having treaties in place to find the right allocation key to allocate the right to tax to the right country where we think it's appropriate. Under the current regimes, under the current treaty rules, under the current rules of international taxation, there is an important rule already in place to do that. And also in Romania, those kind of regulations are in place, and they're actually pretty important. They're called transfer pricing regulations. Transfer pricing is our local rules in an international context to determine and to assess the value of contracts and economic transactions within a group. So when we look at this scheme, the transactions between these companies in the same group are subject to transfer pricing rules in one country, in the other country. And the principle there is that we need to operate what we call at arm's length. And maybe you've heard about this principle. An arm's length is a military term. You need to be at arm's length from each other in such a way that you are, all these soldiers are all at arm's length, which is, they're all the same. They're acting with each other as if they were independent. So the principle of transfer pricing rules in Romania all over the world is that you need to deal with your associated company within the group in the same way as if you would deal with a non-associated company. Very simple, very clear. You can explain that to your mom, to your grandma. It's fair. But now it comes to the implementation. It's not so easy to do that, actually, because what we do as tax planners, and certainly when you are a transfer pricing expert, which is a discipline in itself, in our profession, international tax law and international tax consultancy, transfer pricing is a part of it, and it's a specialized area in itself. Mainly an area where economists are more active than lawyers, because transfer pricing is about allocation and determining what the value of the supply chain is all about. So you see more economics being active there than lawyers. Very interesting stuff. But there we then actually also are working on these kind of schemes, and we are separating and splitting the whole scheme up into all sorts of... what could be an interesting way to still deal with the arm's length principle? We still are working as if we are independent in our group, but we are looking at transaction from a different perspective. In other words, we are taking the risk out of the transaction and say to the one party in Romania, for instance, you only supply me the services. You only supply me the people. I will take care of the rest. I will own the brand. I will do the research and development. I will take the risk of the creditors. So you only supply me the people. Now if you have a scheme in place where, for instance, Google or Intel or Oracle, all these kind of companies are big in Romania, look Packard, Microsoft, IBM, all those companies have a big presence in Romania. How do you think they operate in their transfer pricing model? What do you think that scheme is all about? Do you have any idea? How do they charge for their services? So IBM, Google is big here. Well, let's say Intel. Intel is having a group of software engineers, IT specialists working in an office space somewhere in Ruiter there, and they actually are working for the US Intel company and also for their Intel operations in Asia. So they don't produce for the local market, they actually only produce for the group. 2 clients. One client in the US, one client in... How do they charge for their costs? How do they make their profit? What's their business model? How do they set their prices? How do they determine their intercompany charges?
IT prices are not, aren't they at lower level, IT prices? Prices for software and other stuff like that?
Well, what do you mean? So you produce one IT solution and you charge me €100,000 or something like that. What do you mean?
There isn't a big difference between prices for software in different countries.
So for example,
yes.
For example, what I think is going to say, you can buy the Office suite from Microsoft at the same price, even if you are in Romania, even if you are in UK, even if you are in the United States, right?
No, but the value of the labor force here, I think, is much cheaper than software engineer working in Europe.
Yeah, but the output of the product of this software engineer in Romania could be as valuable, if not more valuable, than the same expert who's working in the UK, who receives an annual salary which is 3 or 4 times higher.
I remember reading that the Romanian laws were set up to encourage software development.
Absolutely.
They pay lower taxes for it.
We pay lower taxes for the individuals, that's also true. We incentivize the scheme, we want to attract more of those business, so that's also, that's how Romania is copying the Irish model, trying to copy it. But the allocation, or let's say the computation of the value of the work, the product actually that comes out of a group of 100 engineers working on a software development project, is very difficult to determine. We don't know how to do this. Because you can say, well, you work for 1 month on a product or an IT solution, it costs you, and I can hear this solution, €100,000. And so that's what the Intel company in Asia said, oh, thank you very much. Yes, I can use that, I will work it further out and I will implement it in my other solutions for Intel globally. Difficult. You don't know, you can't really allocate that. Put aside the fact that probably the work isn't done in 1 month because you don't know. It may take even more time or the solution is not working. So in order to get those kind of allocation, working from a traditional business model where we look at cost, margins, and the profit margin, including direct cost, indirect cost, you know the scheme, is not applicable for the multinational schemes that we know them for the Intels and for those kind of companies. They don't work in all aspects. Difficulty in terms of price, and moreover, those guys in Intel here in Ruiter, hundreds of them are employed. Some of them are working for a project for the US Intel, some of them are working for Shanghai, some are working for wherever. They work in an international environment. And today they work for this project, and tomorrow work for other projects. So the allocation of their hours to specific products is not as simple. It's just possible. It's impossible. It's basically impossible. So the Romanian tax authorities cannot put their finger on it and say, this is the profit I need to have. Because you as Intel in Romania have worked on this whole thing, and this is what it is. I want to have that element of your output of the product in your tax base in Romania?
Romanian tourists can they just they can just tax they give say that can't they just tax only the revenues or the incomes of the Romanian market? For example, all the solutions that Intel...
But there is no Intel product sold in the Romanian market. The product that you buy, the Intel you buy in Romania, is bought from Intel US or Intel Switzerland. You don't buy from Romania, you buy from Intel somewhere, Intel space.
So how do you determine the price, the transferring price between Intel Romania and Intel US?
So you say again?
How do you determine the transfer price?
Well, so the solution is those kind of schemes, and that's not only in Romania, but that's a commonly used scheme for allocation of profits, what we call a cost-plus scheme. So we simply say, Intel Romania has so much cost, which is the office, which is the heating, which is the coffee machine, which is the salaries, total cost, everything. Is fully compensated and paid by the US, by the parent company, and I allocate a margin, a cost plus margin, to those costs as the deemed profit. So in other words, Romania simply gets 5%, 10% of those costs as the profit base. And we all think that's fair. It's the most practical solution to allocate some of the profits, because otherwise you just couldn't allocate direct products to those kind of activities.
So it's a percentage of total cost for Intel Romania?
Sorry?
So it's a percentage?
Yeah. If all the cost of Intel Romania is 10 million, and let's say the cost plus margin is 6%, 60,000, 10 million, 600,000 is the profit in Romania.
How did they determine the cost plus margin?
And that's another question then, how is it, what should it be, 6%? Should it be 10%? Should it be 25%? And that's where we as experts also come in to advise and discuss what is a fair arm's length allocation of the profit cost plus margin. And it could range from 2% to 25%. What kind of factors do you think determine the level of the cost plus? Because it's a good question. But how do you determine and how do you discuss, how do you have a technical discussion with the tax authorities or a defense file saying, no, it should be 10%? Based on which considerations?
Depends on the level of tax on the revenues in that country.
You don't have any revenue, there's no revenue. There's no revenue because you only allocate cost. The business model is completely different. Intel sends an invoice every month to the United States to get money. Send me money, more money. And Intel pays, no problem. This is just outside of the books, administration, computational tax base.
Yes, but in Romanian stores, you may buy Intel products, and even though this may not be Intel Romanian products, they are sold in Romania. So why can this be a criteria? For example, how many Intel? Doesn't matter from which Intel, but in Romania, how many Intel products did we sold last year, for example? Because,
like I said, I mean, the example of Intel is interesting because those, maybe but less other international products. If you buy, well, let's talk about it. You buy Intel is they make a chip. So it's actually part of your computer. So it's included in your price of your laptop.
I can buy it separately.
You can also buy. But most of the time it's actually part of your computer.
Yes.
So it's included in the price of your Apple or your Lenovo, whatever you buy.
So Lenovo and Apple also have a market in Romania.
Yeah.
So why can Intel, why the earnings from Romania market can be counted as Intel Romania earnings? Because
it is in a way, because it's all because then you get into a commercial transaction where the price of the chips of Intel is actually produced is sold by Intel based on global contracts with Microsoft, whoever they sell their Intel chips to have them included in the products. So that's already done, and then it becomes part of the active commercial activities of the distributor. That could be somebody completely different than Intel. So let me finish, because the distributor is typically independent, not part of the Intel group. It's a retailer. It could be Domo, it could be whoever, Media, whatever we have in Romania. Nothing to do with Intel. They just bought the products, and the profit is therefore in the United States or in Switzerland, where they sold the products from.
Yes, but also if from United States, let's say Intel United States agrees or contracts a retailer from Romania, then the Intel United States have at the end an earning from Romania.
No, well, they sell things to a Romanian distributor who buys it for a certain price, and that distributor sells it to you or to me. Makes a margin, pays the taxes, but Intel doesn't pay anything in Romania.
Regarding your question, in which you stated that Intel has only cost and why it should be taxed. Well, if the higher the cost of a company, the higher its revenues usually. That's a true fact in economy. So based on that, you could say that when the cost of the company increases, they should pay more tax. So you can think of a percentage. Then on the other hand, regarding the
I think you're saying something very interesting. The higher the cost, the higher the profit.
The revenue.
The revenue. Well, the revenue, so high revenue, so you have potentially a higher profit because you have more revenue.
Yes, but as a percentage, it may stay the same.
Yeah. What I'm trying to explain is, and I understand it's conceptually a bit difficult to comprehend, but what I'm trying to explain is that the mechanism of a cost-plus arrangement is a completely different business model. We do not longer look at the output and the quality and the value of the products, because like in the IT sector, but also in other sectors, R&D for instance, but also sometimes in construction or production, the classical allocation of the price of a product to determine the overall profit of a company in a year doesn't work.
But another assumption would be the fact that if Intel conducts businesses in Romania, it means it obtains something, so it has a profit. Otherwise, it wouldn't do.
The example I'm giving, this is just 100 engineers, bright guys and girls, working there in the office in Pisa. They don't produce anything specifically which is meant to be sold in the Romanian market.
Yes,
and maybe even what they do for a number of years is not commercially attractive anyway. They just do stuff, and it doesn't. It has to be done, but it's maybe in 5 years something will happen.
So a criteria for this the transfer price could be the costs that one of the criteria could be how much cost. If you have higher costs, the percentage will be higher.
Yeah, that's what we say in this kind of schemes, transfer pricing solutions, in order to have at least some sort of allocation which feels fair, which everybody sort of accepts, which is accepted by OECD, is these are your total costs. We just deem that 6% of those costs, top of those plus those costs, is your profit. That's where you pay tax on. Simple. Everybody says, yeah, simple, understand. That's okay. Sorry, yeah.
I'm not really good in economics. I'm a law student, but why don't we view the profit in a more consolidated way, in the sense that if a company is a group or is profitable, and if they, for example, have business, a part of the business in Romania, why don't you just, as Romania government, tax a part of that profit, the whole profit of the company?
Because then people will probably say, I'm not going to Romania. No, I mean, it's a good, I mean, your thought process is correct. And that's actually how it should be done. Because let's say we have to allocate some way the activities of all these 100 people. They do a lot of work, they do good stuff.
I think the world has already seen the worst part of this interconnection, globalization process, the financial crisis. So why don't we try to see, to implement the bright side of this interconnection?
And how? I mean, I like solutions, but I don't see how. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to?
By seeing the profit as in a consolidated way, because if you take the business out of Romania, then subsequently.
I mean, I think we will probably start. Where is the consolidated profit here? Like I said, this is Switzerland. These are all over the world. This is in the Netherlands. This is in the British Virgin Islands. This is Romania, Poland, the Czech Republic, all over the world. This is you and me. Where's the profit? Where's the consolidated profit? Now you can combine all the activities for as far as they are owned by one group. Let's say Unilever or Trigano. Somebody owns this. There's a shareholder. So there's a headquarters, and there's a head office, and there's a consolidation. But the consolidation is just an accounting result of combining all these profits of the group without taking into account the fact that there are 20 countries where the profit comes from. And because there is no consolidated tax rule. It would work if we have a consolidated tax base to be taxed also as one tax in the European Union. It works in the US, more or less. US has of course the federal taxes, but they also have state taxes. But in the US it sort of works. But in Europe it doesn't work.
What about thinking that there's a different cost for labor and for other stuff in Romania compared to US, and take the difference between the cost and then apply a percentage? Would that work?
Very interesting, yes. No, I mean, that is an approach which is typically now also put in discussion. I don't know how much time we have. How much time do we have? Because I actually have a lot of slides still to go through. Is it okay? Is this a good discussion? Do you like this? Do we need to do something else? Because I like to touch this. Because this is a very interesting topic that you're raising, which actually I've been dealing with yesterday with a client. We are living in a world where we are very much getting familiar and understand that things like arm's length pricing, cost plus arrangement, transfer pricing, allocation of profit, no real consolidation, I'm sorry, it doesn't work. But that works. The OECD model is all around that principle. So we're always arguing and trying to find arguments, defense files, to say this is what you would normally pay if you were not related. And that's the profit which is in Romania or else. Other countries, some of the emerging markets, not Romania, let's say, some of the emerging markets, where you can see that the margins as a result of this are very low, are against this. They follow a different approach. Because if you really continue with this whole process of thought process that you should have only a cost-plus arrangement in these kind of global schemes, you end up having a scheme like this one where the profit is the highest amount of the profit in the group actually is allocated to a country with the lowest tax, Switzerland or the British Virgin Islands. No tax, or a very small amount of tax. That's not what we want. Countries like China and India say, I don't give a about your transfer pricing rules. I don't believe in it. I follow his example. I have so many people working here, and okay, I can live with a cost-plus arrangement, but the cost-plus arrangement should be 25–30%. So the iPads that are produced by Foxconn in China are produced there for a cost base, the actual cost of production, the salaries and the factories and the lights and heating and the distribution cost, plus a markup of 25–30%. And in some cases, the Chinese authorities simply say 100%. And that's what you're referring to. Is that fair? Is that because that's the outcome what you're saying. Is that fair?
Well, you just don't have.
It's a solution. It's a solution. Is it fair?
If you're thinking of a percentage, 100% is a lot. But if you are actually thinking of the difference between the two costs, 100% may be low.
Yeah. Well, iPads are very interesting. Yeah? We all love iPads and we all have smartphones and things like that. They are typically produced in China. The IP rights of Apple is owned by a US company. The software uploaded in an iPad, for as far as they are owned by Apple, are typically developed in India. Then you buy on your Apple all sorts of applications coming from all over the world. Who taxes it? So this is also an interesting product to look at. But you see in the development of globalization, and as those kind of countries become powerful, India and China become more and more influential in this process, also become part of the G8, just simply saying, whatever you want to do with all this transfer pricing regulation discussions, whatever kind of nice schemes you make, I just want to have 100%. But no, just want 100%. Now, then you come into a situation that Apple can say, well, I move my production out of China. That's what they do. They can do. So then you get into negotiation. How far does China go with pushing the limits to the extent that Apple will say, okay, it's probably cheaper to produce it in California. I think the new iPhone from Apple will be produced in, I think an iPhone. The new iPhone is going to be produced in California. You see a trend coming back because of those kind of things. So all these kind of transfer discussions, all these kind of tax considerations, ultimately are determining where production takes place, where prosperity is built up, where value is created. Just as some last comments, I'd like to make some reference to the important. So this is the context, but this will be over. As a kind of result of the discussion that I was just describing, the OECD issued a report in March to address all these kind of things. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, I would certainly encourage you to try to get hold of this report. It is 80 pages, because it's extremely interesting. It's called base erosion and profit shifting. That's what we have been talking about. The OECD is concerned about this, and of course they've been asked by the G8 to do a study about this topic and describe specific things that we have in place that we already see happening on a global scale. that erase the base of taxation and shift profit to locations where you don't want it to be. And this report tries to address the things that we talk about in this session. It's trying to give a sort of an overview of what kind of things are happening, what is desirable, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. So it is actually describing much of the things that we have just been talking about. So as a background, it's a bit of a longer discussion about this kind of things. So there are long-running concerns from tax authorities all over the world and governments on virtually all issues that we call harmful tax competition. And that's the phrase. The OECD and the G8, the G20 have developed a concept of harmful tax competition. If all governments all over the world continue to do the things that they've done in Ireland, ultimately will pay no taxes anymore. There is a race to the bottom. Every country tries to be more competitive than the other, and you see it happening already. When I started my professional life, the corporate tax rate in the Netherlands was 42%. Now it's 22%, and it's only to attract foreign investors. We want to make sure that we are competitive. Now, if it goes too far, it's harmful. It's also to be seen in the context of what I mentioned, the austerity packages that are imposed on citizens all over the world. If we see that governments are struggling to collect money, and if we see that our income is going down because of higher taxes or less money for the public sector, same time we see that the big multinationals are making more and more profits and do everything they can to shift their profits away. There's a mismatch. And if the financial crisis has shown something on the global scale, the economic crisis has shown one thing, that we see that the pressure is only increasing because we are all in all countries struggling with this kind of thing. We all want to make sure that everybody pays a fair share. At the European Union level, it has been determined that based on these kind of things, and this is not the planning I'm talking about, let's say, but there is a tax leakage of €1 trillion. And this is not planning, this is not a stuff that I'm talking about, this is not a scheme, this is not norms, this is outside of the scheme. This is the black economy. The big concern, if we would have 1 trillion, that's 1,000 billion, what is it, 1,000 million, that's something. 1,000, that's a lot of money. Euro every year. If you would have that in the system, we could solve the banking crisis. We could solve everything. So that is money which actually should be in the economy, should be part of the tax system, and it's not. And of course the European Union is desperately trying to find ways in a multilateral governance scheme to get more of that money into the system. One way of doing this has actually been launched last weekend. I don't know if you picked it up from the news, but the governments of, I think, Spain, France, Germany, 5 or 6 countries have agreed to have an automatic exchange of information about the banking bank accounts. So if you have a bank account in Spain, and you're living in Romania, or you're living in the Netherlands, or you're living in France, the information of your bank account, information about your bank account in Spain, the interest you receive, the income you receive from the bank account, is automatically transferred to the tax administration in France. That's a major step forward towards trying to battle and attack those kind of international tax problems. For Romania, we think that the black economy is 40 billion euro. That's around 30% of the economy. If you would have that 40% in the economy, well, it would be very risky. Now, there's always a grey economy, there's always a black economy, there's always some leakage. So don't expect, I think even in Sweden or those countries with high tax morale, there's still something like 10 or 12% black economy. So there's always something outside the system. But the point here is that when governments are starting to meet their commitments and to keep the economy healthy, taxpayers' money is very interesting, very important, and we do everything we can to get hold of that. Now, coming back to the tax rules, the banking consolidation, the banking union, you may have heard about it, big issue in the European Union, to consolidate the banks, to have a European governance model to cover all the banks. It's not going to happen, it's going to happen, maybe it's going to happen. There will be a European banking unification, banking control, or not. I think after Cyprus we have moved on to yes, it's going to happen, but maybe not this year, maybe next year or later. What happened last weekend with Spain, France, Germany, and I think Austria is already a step forward in the direction. If you have automatic exchange information of the banking transactions among these countries in the European Union, it's only one step further full banking unification and banking unification consolidation of the governance model. Very interesting from the perspective of the right to tax again. I think then you touch upon legal concepts such as the privacy, for instance. That's an interesting component. I don't want everybody to be able to have access to my bank accounts. There is something like privacy around it. There is something like the principle of what is it called? Territory. What is it called? The right to. The government is not allowed to govern outside of a territory. The limitation of the control of a government is limited to the territory.
Sovereignty.
Sovereignty, yeah. So all those kind of things are all of a sudden, which are big important principles of our legal system all over Europe. All of a sudden they are put aside because we are in difficult situations, and we see that leakage of tax revenue or a black economy is creeping up. So yeah, the report on tax base erosion and profit shifting, I have a few slides on that. So the priorities according to the OECD when they are making analysis of what kind of schemes are already in place and which are commonly used by the multinationals, the Starbucks and the Intels and Google of the world, to do this profit shifting. These are essentially our toolbox. As an international tax lawyer, tax consultant, this is my toolbox. This is how I go to the office, I take it with me, and this is what I do with clients. The use of different financial instruments, shifting mobile resources, so moving stuff around, specific tax issues related to digital business, over leveraging of local operations, I'll come back to that. Yeah, lack of information sounds a bit nasty, sounds like a bit criminal, but in our world, as a taxpayer, as a citizen, in a relationship with the authorities, with the government, you are not supposed to give more information than you are obliged to or than you are asked to do. So if you are asked to give certain information, as long as you are within the guidelines of the rules, you are fine. But if you play with that in the right way, giving the right information at the right moment and playing it the right way can play a lot of advantages. Use of tax incentives. I mentioned the Irish model. I mentioned the Romanian model, the Dutch model. Lack of resources to target issues. Overall, in all Europe, all the OECD countries, all those tax administrations are simply too small and not equipped enough, not smart enough to address all those things. A company like GE, General Electric, has more tax professionals in the organization than probably in whole Romanian tax administration are now. Thousands of people working on this. This is extremely important stuff. GE is a massive company, one of the biggest companies in the world. They are in different fields. They are in banking, they are in production, they are in project management, they are in services, they are in engineering. They have thousands of people in the organization who are only working in tax prep. Now, there is no tax administration who can compete with them. They will always lose. If you're looking for a career in tax, your future is either to become a consultant or work for the administration. Have you ever thought about it?
Yes. Yes. But
What would have your preference?
Surely not government.
No? Why not?
Because I don't think that it's a proper environment there.
Okay.
They're seen as bad people by most Romanians because the tax system is, instead of helping people and advising them, they're actually sanctioning them.
Yeah.
And this but not last but not least important, the wage is not proper.
Salary is not good. Yeah. That's true. I mean, I don't advocate any kind of direction. Of course, I have also built up a certain preference because of my career. Most of my career actually was in consultancy. And I think some of the things that you're referring to, I can agree with, certainly when in a Romanian context. However, when you look back, what I know also from my colleagues in the Netherlands, a similar room 30 years ago, tax students, half of them went to the government, half of them went to consultancy. Actually working in the government, working in the tax administration, is a pretty interesting job. If you look at this context, look at it in this context, I would not certainly exclude, because certainly you're right. The current situation working there now is not a nice career, but it's just a matter of time. Just a matter of time that the tax administration in Romania also will become an important player to address those kind of things, and then you become an equal to have a good discussion with the consultants and the multinationals to come to a fair allocation of tax. Let me make that very clear, probably also at the end of my presentation here. Let me make it very clear. I am not an advocate, we are not an advocate, PwC is not an advocate of trying to do everything we can to cheat the tax. We're not. That's not our business, that's not our value. We want to make sure that the right tax is paid in the right place. In such a way that ultimately clients, our business, the business world, the corporate world in general, is sustainable. And yes, of course, if then there are opportunities to do it in the right way and mitigate taxes and use certain schemes that are applicable and are well understood and well described, that's our profession. But I appreciate very much a good conversation with a tax inspector or somebody in the Ministry of Finance who says that some of those schemes are not fair, are not the right way, it should be done, treated in this way. Then we find a solution. I very much appreciate a good professional conversation about those topics, get into a context of discussion and an agreement where we ultimately have a fair allocation of corporate rights. That's the right balance that we need to find. And like I said, the current situation, and this was recognized by the OECD, most of the tax administrations in most countries do not have sufficient power to do so. These are some schemes, and if you like, let me know, because I can send a presentation to you, because I think we need to wrap up. Some schemes that are also described in the OECD report, where a technical description is given of how the planning works in practice. And these are some expectations we have from what will happen in the future. Let me just come past the slide. next steps for Romania. So having said all the things that I've said, we as PwC, but also working with our colleagues in other consultancy firms, working with our clients, of course, in many aspects, have, how shall I say, a wish list. We are in an ongoing conversation with the Ministry of Finance. We have our political contacts in the political parties to constantly try to improve the fiscal climate in Romania as well, in the context of the whole thing. Ultimately, of course, we'd like to have a system in place where more prosperity, let's say the Irish model or any kind of other model which is sustainable for Romania, is based to a large extent on fiscal measures that are influencing the economy in a positive way. And from our perspective, we can see these kind of things that are relevant and important to implement in Romania to achieve that. We believe that's the moment of time now to introduce a holding regime and a financing regime in Romania which is similar to what is in place in Cyprus. There's nothing wrong. Actually, the Romanian tax revenue will increase if the same rules are applicable and make Cyprus attractive, will be introduced in Romania. Most of the Romanian businesses, if they're entrepreneurs, they're Romanian entrepreneurs, most of them, if not, I would say up to 90%, is owned by Cyprus companies. So if you're a Romanian entrepreneur, you have a chain of shops, or you have restaurants, or you have a business, whatever. You have it all in your Romanian SRL, but then in order to have that in a fiscal, efficient structure organized and set up, you use a Cyprus holding company for specific reasons. And we don't have time for that, why there are other reasons signed, but that's what typically happens in most of the cases. In order to, what we are referring to, and we are actually at this moment of time drafting and writing legislation for the Ministry of Finance to think about this and to introduce holding regimes in Romania. If you would have a holding regime in place, holding regulations, holding rules, similar as they are applicable in Cyprus, all those holding companies in Cyprus would come to Romania. And then we talk about 10, 15,000 companies, and that will have a massive impact on the economy of Romania, the banking sector, everything will be very positive. So we think that will be an important improvement of the Romanian corporate system. A lot of work for us, a lot of work for you guys in the future. Other thing like is the consultation. We'd like to see more interpretive rulings, more open dialogue with the Ministry of Finance about that kind of thing. Sometimes it's a bit annoying and a bit unpleasant that you are working on certain schemes and have certain ideas and certain creative thoughts, and you need to have them verified with the tax administration and the tax authorities in Romania that they don't give you the response that you're looking for. Business people want to know what they can rely on. The Starbucks story I just told you in the beginning of this presentation is all based on the fact that they have a signature from the inspector in the UK, a signature from the inspector in the Netherlands. We want that also in Romania, to be more sure. There will be more focus on substance. The word substance is an important word in our business, in international tax planning. Substance is all about the reality. You may have a nice contract, you may have a nice scheme, you may have a nice PowerPoint presentation, but if in substance nothing is really there, with substance all these subject companies are nothing more than just paper box companies, and they don't really have somebody or something behind it with risk, with activity, with knowledge, with people, then there is essentially no substance. Now substance is at the same time a very difficult thing to put your finger on, because you need to have 10 people, you need to have 15 people, you need to have one person. Who determines if somebody is knowledgeable? Who determines what the real added value of that person is? So substance ultimately is something which is subjective to what the tax inspector and what the tax consultant and the company is able to demonstrate to that word. But in essence, what we will see as a result of the OECD report, the BEPS report, and also discussions that I described around Starbucks, that we will have more discussions about substance, also in Romania. I think I'd like to leave it there. Is there anything specific that you would like to ask me? Please do so now or forever hold your... If not, I think I'll be still around for a few minutes. If you want to give me your card, please do so that I can send you. If you want to give the presentation, I can send it to you. Or have my secretary to send it to you. And then, having said that, I appreciate your attentiveness and the interactions, good comments from